Hello and welcome to this round 13 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. It's going to be unlucky for someone, and we've got ourselves a rematch in this feature match area in Duke. Chris Fennell looking to lock up his top 8 spot this round if he can. He's back against Eric Froehlich though. When it came to limited, Eric Froehlich had the edge. Let's head down. It's a feature match area and find out how things work out in constructed here for round 13 of Pro Tour Amonkhet. Hello and welcome to this round 13 of Pro Tour Amonkhet. There we can see our feature match area, a whole host of talent, many of whom Rich and Maria were talking about mere moments ago, because these are the players that are starting to think about a top 8 berth. In the feature match area, battling this round, Josh Cho and Jerry Thompson of Team Mutiny both in there. But that's not who we're going to be seeing to begin with. We're going to be kicking things off with these two men. First up, we have on one side of the screen, Chris Fennell. There we stand. He picked up only one loss thus far in the tournament, and that loss was against this man, Hall of Famer Eric Froehlich. Froehlich defeated him in draft, but this is a completely different format, Ian. We now have Black-White Zombies in the hand of Chris Fennell against Teamer Etherworks Marvel coming from Eric Froehlich. Let's see which deck they're going to be able, which deck is going to be able to prevail now that we come down to constructed.
Yeah, to give you a flavor of the variance of these decks, because we've seen versions of these throughout the weekend already. Eric Froehlich is playing a very spell-heavy and very all-in version of the Etherworks Marvel deck. Basically, his only hits off of Marvel are 4 Ulamogs, and he also has 1 Torrential Gearhulk there. But he's really, really looking for Ulamog off of his Marvel activations, and his whole deck is centered around making that happen, generating energy, buying him time, and so on. Now, on Chris Fennell's side of the battlefield, he is on the black-white version of zombies, so splashing white for cards such as Binding Mummy, Wayward Servant, and Anguished Unmaking. And having chatted with Chris at the end of the day yesterday, he said Anguished Unmaking is absolutely the most important card in this particular matchup, in that it can take out an Etherworks Marvel. Say Eric's first activation misses and he has a tapped Marvel, well, Chris can go ahead and remove that with an Anguished Unmaking. Or if Eric is actually able to hit an Ulamog, Anguished Unmaking can also take care of that, provided that Chris had enough permanence, enough pressure on the battlefield that he can still keep the pressure on Eric. Following an Ulamog, he can very much come back from one if he can remove it with Anguished Unmaking.
So plenty of interaction here for this White-Black Zombies deck. It's an early Dread Wanderer from Fennell, followed up by a Crypt Breaker. And considering the fact that these are 1-mana creatures, there's a lot of text going on between these two. One of them is a 2/1 that can come back from the graveyard if you've got not many cards in hand and a bit of mana to spend. But this Crypt Breaker, you can tap 3 untapped zombies to draw a card and lose a life. You can also make zombie tokens by discarding cards. Very potent 1-drops.
Yeah, in my mind, Crypt Breaker is the central card of the Zombies deck. And my reason for saying that, Tim, is that this is the reason that if you leave the Zombies deck uninteracted with over a long period of time, it's just going to snowball that advantage. It's going to keep making zombies. It's going to draw more cards. It's going to find more zombie lords to keep pumping them up. And this is one of the reasons, why Mardu vehicles, for example, can struggle against zombies, is that the zombie deck is just growing and growing and growing its horde over time. So Dark Salvation there, another really powerful reward for zombies, comes down and takes out that Rogue Refiner. For sometimes just a single black mana, this card can take out huge creatures. Or, if you don't have anything else to spend your mana on, you can kick it, as it were, for a bunch more zombies on the way.
Now, we saw Chris Fennell playing the Dark Salvation and choosing not to attack. That's signaling that we're likely to see him tapping his zombies down to draw a card here. Etherworks Marvel coming down for Eric Froehlich. He already has 6 energy, so even if it works out that Chris Fennell does draw into a great answer here, he's going to have to let that wheel spin at least the once here for Eric Froehlich.
So again here, Tim, I've got my finger over the advantage bar, not ready to send it any which direction just yet, because both players, had a good early game here. Both their decks are doing what they're trying to do. A lot of this is going to come down to what Eric actually sees off of his first Etherworks Marvel activation. You can see there Eric has a decent hand to follow up with should he miss on that first Marvel, but it's going to take him a while to deploy that. And in the meantime, Chris Fennell has a pretty decent battlefield. Let's take a look at Fennell's hand here. He's a little bit land heavy, a little bit flooded out here. He's got a Diagraph Colossus and a Lord of the Accursed. What he'd really love to see is an Anguished Unmaking to better prepare him if that Marvel should hit.
Now, one cool thing about the way that Crypt Breaker ends up playing out is that some of the time you get to do everything that you want to do all in one go. You get to develop your board and draw cards at the same time. And we can see that sort of coming to fruition here. First comes down the Diagraph Colossus. That means that every zombie that gets cast by Chris Fennell will mean that an additional zombie token's coming into play. Follow that up with a Dread Wanderer. Yes, these zombies are coming to play tapped, but look how wide Chris Fennell's board is here. He's really putting pressure on Eric Froehlich to actually find something of relevance off this Aetherworks Marvel.
So here it comes. Activates the Marvel end of turn. Let's see what he comes up with. It is Ulamog.
We did it. Kids, we found a way. And so now he's going to be able to target 2 of the permanents in play for Chris Fennell and exile them. And it's hard to overstate how important exile is versus just putting creatures in the graveyard for this zombies deck, because various of the creatures that Chris Fennell's working with care about cards in the graveyard as well. I mean, a Diagraph Colossus will quite happily count the number of zombies in the graveyard and come into play slightly larger if there are already some there. Various other creatures can quite simply come back.
So Ulamog, a huge hit there for Eric, able to take out a couple of creatures there. Now, it is worth mentioning that because Chris Fennell had a solid start and was able to get a bunch of zombies onto the battlefield before Eric activated his Marvel, Eric was forced to take out some actual creatures instead of, say, for example, attacking Chris's mana base. And that's going to leave Chris able to continue to cast more spells. And if he does, present a couple chump blockers for a few turns, maybe draw into an Anguished Unmaking, he's definitely not out of the game yet. Although, of course, Eric is at a huge advantage having that enormous Eldrazi on the battlefield turn 4.
Worth noting that it's not as if this match only goes one way. We actually already heard that Jerry Thompson has won his game 1 with mono black zombies against Mark Tobias on Aetherworks Marvel in our feature match area as well. But as things stand here, things looking a little rough for Chris Fennell. One interesting card that he could in principle draw that's kind of interesting is Binding Mummy. Means that he can potentially either do things to sort of tap things down or generally make life more problematic for an Ulamog that wants to attack.
Yeah, now specifically Binding Mummy in combination with a Crypt Breaker can actually tap down the Ulamog on Eric's own turn and prevent it from attacking. But that's, I would say, one of the main reasons why Eric took out the Crypt Breaker with the Ulamog trigger previously. So, again, Chris has a couple angles here. If he can hit Anguished Unmaking, if he can hit Binding Mummy plus Crypt Breaker, or if he can just somehow flood the board really quickly, he can definitely get back into this game here, but in the meantime, things are sitting very nice for Eric here, and we did see that Eric's hand is still pretty decent here with a bunch of gas left in the tank. Now, looks like players are discussing a little bit here. There may be an issue with sound being audible.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, even if it works out that nothing more changes, just the fact that Ulamog's going on is a little scary.
Now, to explain the situation, we actually have a central stage here with all of our feature matches. You can see the audience there in the background, and we do have, our commentary and our stream being broadcast to the audience there so that they can watch sitting out right in front of the feature matches. Now, the trouble here is we normally have headphones on the players here that are kind of pumping white noise into their ear so that they can't actually hear the broadcast or hear the crowd's reaction to what's going on, but there may be some technical difficulties going on there. So our judges and staff are just getting that worked out with the players there, and we'll have to get things back on track here in just a moment.
Well, things back on track for Eric Froehlich. He does get to attack in here with Ulamog, and that's exactly where he wants to be. 20 cards coming off the top of Chris Fennell's deck. Fennell carefully counting them out. All going to get exiled. And Eric Froehlich is not going to mind having a little bit more information about exactly what's going on the other side of the table here. Chris also looking at that pile, because for him, this is telling him what he can hope to draw into and which hopes are already dashed in that regard. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot coming down for Froehlich. A couple more energy, and that means that this Aetherworks Marvel, even though it used all of the energy initially to activate, it's able to activate again pretty swiftly.
And we can see Eric leaving up both Censor and Harness Lightning here. So he has some powerful tools to interact. If Chris goes for a combination of spells and ends up playing it a Censor, that could work out poorly for him. And then there's also a Harness Lightning waiting to take out something like a Crypt Breaker or a Binding Mummy. So I would say at this point, given the tools that Eric has at his disposal here, he is definitely a huge favorite to win this game, and just a couple short turns from now, but we'll see what Chris Fennell can come up with. Taking a look at Chris's hand, he has Lord of the Accursed, a couple lands, and I think he did draw one more card for the turn. We're getting that updated for you.
I think that's a Wayward Servant. Wayward Servant, kind of an interesting one that means that even if boards get really locked up, there is a way of pushing through damage. That not necessarily how I would describe this board state. Locked up isn't really the problem, it's just that even if Chris Fennell is blocking, he's not really achieving too much in terms of winning the game. Ulamog will quite happily eat his entire library in just a few short bites. Wayward Servant coming down here. You can see Chris Fennell just holding it above the battlefield. He's respecting the fact that there could be counter magic coming from Froehlich. Froehlich has a little read before deciding to do anything, and yeah, comes into play just fine. Some relatively hefty swings here coming from Fennell.
So we can see Eric opted not to censor the Wayward Servant, instead going to go for a Harness Lightning on the Lord of the Accursed.
That definitely saves a lot more damage. Otherwise, that would have been an attack for 9.
Now, this is turning into a little bit of a race situation here, which is definitely worth mentioning. You know, Eric down to 15 life here, you know, probably fearing combination of Lords on Chris's side of the battlefield. Now, Ulamog does need to be chump blocked this turn, which is going to reduce Chris down to 4 creatures here. But, you know, Eric still has to at least think through, go through the motions about making sure he's planning out this race carefully, making sure he's not leaving himself vulnerable to, like, a combination of 2 pump effects next turn on Chris's
even just
zombies.
a Liliana's Mastery, 2 points of drain from the Wayward Servant, plus pumping the entire team in a way that's slightly trickier to remove could be problematic.
Right. But we do see Eric does have some interaction still in his hand here. He's got a couple choices. He can either leave up the Harness Lightning there to take out another creature, or he could perhaps play a Warlord Virtuoso, make a Thopter. That leaves him with 2 blockers. You know, both are good options there. I think both are going to result in a victory for Eric, but, you know, just worth mentioning the things that he needs to think through as he plans out these last couple turns.
So 2 bites already taken out of Chris Fennell's library. This crunch time for Chris Fennell. He needs to draw something great this very turn, and it does not look like he got there.
That was likely Chris's last draw step, and yeah, indeed it is.
Fennell scoops up his cards. Eric Froehlich, the one man that has thus far been able to deny a perfect record to Chris Fennell, picks up the first game in this round 13 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. We'll be back with more Magic for you very shortly, but first, these messages.
Grand Prix events offer great experiences for players of all skill levels. These Magic celebrations are headlined by 2-day open tournaments with pro players, feature top artist signings, and host a wide range of side events. Find an upcoming Grand Prix event near you at magic.wizards.com/Grand Prix. Up your game with Ultra Pro Magic the Gathering accessories. Find the best Magic art on card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and more. Visit ultrapro.com to learn more and find a retailer near you.
Hello and welcome back to this round 13 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. We've just seen our first game between Eric Froehlich and Chris Fennell, and they are just finishing up their sideboarding. And I wanted to talk a little bit with you, Ian, if I may, about how that sideboarding may have gone for the two of them. We spoke about how the black-white version of Zombies has a little bit more potential for interaction. How does that get heightened, I suppose, after sideboarding?
Well, we mentioned Anguished Unmaking as one of the key cards that Chris Fennell has 2 copies of his main deck. He's definitely going to be adding a 3rd copy of that, allowing him to interact more with Ulamog and with Aetherworks Marvel. Now, the other key card that Chris has access to in his sideboard to disrupt Eric's plans is Transgress the Mind. This is a hand disruption spell. It can take out a card with converted mana cost 3 or more, which means it can take out Aetherworks Marvel, being the key target there, but potentially also some other things that Eric might have access to, like a odd Torrential Gearhulk or Glimmer of Genius to slow him down, so on and so forth. Now, on Eric's side, he doesn't have quite as potent of a sideboard to add in here. He does have 2 copies of Radiant Flames, which will help sweep away that initial wave of zombies. But I think by and large, overall, the post-sideboarding, or at least, the delta, the change that happens from sideboarding is favoring Chris Fennell here in this matchup.
And it looks like Eric Froehlich was not happy with his opening 7 there, shuffling things up and going down to, well, at best 6 cards here. In terms of what the Aetherworks Marvel deck is looking to achieve, is it one that's a little bit more sort of precarious, a bit more complicated a puzzle that maybe mulligans a little bit more?
Yes, definitely susceptible to mulliganing a little bit more, but I would say generally it's less impacted by mulliganing because, especially Eric's version here is very much all in on finding Marvel and activating it as quickly as possible, unlike some of the more mid-rangey versions that we have seen. I think he's happy to go down to 6, if it means an extra look to kind of make sure he has a smooth mana draw, enough energy production, and a Marvel. And it looks like he does go ahead and keep this. I see an Attune with Ether and a Rogue Refiner, and that right there, along with lands to cast them, is going to be a great start for Eric Froehlich.
So if we kind of had to map out the turns of this game, I guess that for Chris Fennell, early on he's looking to be the beatdown, and then once he sees execution from Eric Froehlich of the other plan, he has ways of meaningfully interacting, whereas for Eric, doesn't matter how many cards he has in hand, he simply wants to get down that Aetherworks Marvel and activate it.
Yeah, that's more or less true. And I wouldn't necessarily call Chris actually a beatdown deck so much as he wants to get a little bit of pressure on the board and then back it up with disruption. And again, that disruption being primarily Transgress the Mind and Anguished Unmaking. Now, Chris also has access to Declaration and Stone in his sideboard. He may have brought that in just as an extra way to interact with Ulamog, but it's definitely not quite on the same level as Anguished Unmaking as far as the impact in this matchup.
Now, interestingly, we've seen a few sideboard cards in Chris Fennell's hand that we haven't talked about quite so much. Scrap Heap Scrounger has already been played. That is out of the board. There's also Gideon, ally of Zendikar, going on for Christopher Fennell here. It may be that he's actually thinking, you know what, if I can establish a big enough, wide enough board, I can make even a Resolved Ulamog not able to do quite enough.
Yeah, it could also be like hedging against Eric's having more sweepers in his deck post-sideboard. We talked about Radiant Flames being something Eric has access to. And remember, this is still the Swiss portion of the tournament, so neither player knows exactly necessarily what the other is going to bring in here. I'm sure they have some vague idea, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of jockeying for post-sideboard position in terms of what players bring in here. And Chris Fennell off to a pretty good start here, already with 4 creatures on the battlefield on turn 3, and Eric, off to a much slower start, although he did have a fairly decent post-mulligan hand.
Yeah, wasn't able to cast the Attune with Ether on turn 1 because Lumbering Fall's coming to play untapped, but by the time that we get to turn 3, he does have Rogue Refiner, that kind of reversing his mulligan, getting him sort of up a card where previously he was down, and already at 4 energy. And just having a blocker right now is probably a relatively welcome sight because there are a lot of creatures on the other side of the battlefield considering what stage we're at in the game.
So Chris Fennell a little bit gummed up as far as the hand right now. He only has 3 lands. He's got 2 copies of Gideon and a Liliana's Mastery. So he goes ahead and actually draws with Crypt Breaker instead of attacking for some more pressure there. Just gets in with the Scrap Heap Scrounger. Eric happy to trade with Rogue Refiner. That's what it's there to do, just be a speed bump and get in the way. But it looks like Chris Fennell did hit his 4th land here, so Gideon comes down. Huge, huge 4th untapped land there for Chris Fennell that turn. able to kind of unblock his hand there and get Gideon onto the battlefield. Now really starting to go wide here. And this puts Eric in a pretty tough position, because now with so many creatures on the battlefield, it's not even clear that an Ulamog in the short term would actually get Eric out of this jam. Of course, he can take out 2 of the threats, but Chris still threatening to go wide and back things up with another Gideon potentially. So Eric in a position now where he needs to find both Marvel into Ulamog and also probably a sweeper in the form of Radiant Flames in order to get himself out of this jam, and he may just not be allowed enough time to do that.
Well, a Virtuoso means that at least there's the energy required to do that, and in terms of, if we're talking speed bumps, it can put a lot of bodies in the way when it comes to blocking, but in so doing, he will be spending a lot of energy, so definitely Eric Froehlich kind of in check here. Liliana's Mastery coming down, that's pumping some of what is going on for Chris Fennell as he goes still wider. It looks like Gideon is going to be getting stuck in this round. Of course, with another copy of Gideon in hand, there's even the potential of Emblem or even double Emblem sometime fairly soon in.
So big attack here coming across from Chris Fennell. Gideon is activated there, so we may see that Whirler Virtuoso or a Thopter get in front of the Gideon there. But no, Eric just kind of sees the writing on the wall there. He knows that over the next 2 turns, even if he can survive that turn, he is not going to be able to get out of this jam, and goes ahead and scoops them up, sending that match to game 3.
Another cool thing that was going on there with the Liliana's Mastery, there wasn't an attack from Crypt Breaker, but there were already 2 more zombies in play that could have got immediately tapped to draw still more cards. Just snowballing advantage for Chris Fennell there in that post-sideboard game. Pushes things to a game 3. We'll be able to catch some of that soon. But we're going to get a chance to look in on another match that we've got going on here. It's more zombies, more marvels, but this time the zombies in the hands of Jerry Thompson, and it's Mark Tobiash on the back foot, just 7 life as he faces down zombies, and I believe that's Ormondal Profane Prince up at the top of our screen there. Ormondal, a big tool that's available more to the mono-black versions of this deck than to the black-white ones.
Yeah, really interesting. That's the transformed version of Westvale Abbey.
Kind of scary that there's still 3 zombies in play even after Westvale Abbey's been transformed. A very, very large childless tracker with a slightly smaller friend hanging out there too.
I think I heard Mark say lifeline there as he adds Whirler Virtuoso to the battlefield. He can make a Thopter to get in the way. One last time there, sitting down to 1 energy. And Jerry Thompson going up to 29 life and threatening lethal again next turn. So this may be the final turn, depending on what Mark is able to put together.
Metallic Mimic, another difference between the black-white and the mono-black versions of zombies. The Mimic is one of the potent 2-drops available in this particular build, where you're not using the likes of Wayward Servant or Binding Mummy in that slot. Pumps your entire team as and when they get cast or put into play. In the meantime, though, Tobiash having to dig deep with those tireless trackers. He's got plenty of clues, he's got a lot of mana, but he's got big problems with the big flyer that's coming on over every turn.
Now, fairly interesting race of sorts going on here. Those tireless trackers are huge, with 6 counters and 3 counters apiece coming on in. Jerry throwing some zombies in the way. Of course, Jerry's been padding his life total with the life link from Ormondal. But you know, if Mark is able to generate enough energy to turn those to turn it into Thopters with the Whirler Virtuoso and keep chump blocking and keep growing those tireless trackers, I mean, I do see a way out of this for him. You know, he can't withstand another hit from Ormondal, but if he can just kind of keep throwing stuff in the way, there's definitely a path to victory.
Rogue Refiner draws a card, generates the energy to get up to 3 to make another Thopter. This is a really cool race that we've got going on here, and Chandra Torch of Defiance coming down means that when it comes to finding cards, Mark Tobiash has got it all figured out. Jerry Thompson living off the top of his deck here. Worth noting, of course, that Thompson is already up a game, and I'm sure that he was hoping that things were going to be easy once he had Ormondal down. It looks like Mark Tobiash still willing to make a fight of this one.
tune with Ether, fetching up a mountain here, mostly just there generating energy, though.
Let's give Jerry Thompson maybe a turn or two to see if he can find a way of breaking through here. But we have got Fennell and Froehlich ready to go. We do not want to keep these guys waiting too long because you know what, I'm sure that they're both very keen to, well, Fennell keen to potentially get into a position where top 8 is more or less assured, and Froehlich quite happy to slow him down on that.
It looks like this game tipping more and more in the favor of Mark Tobias here. Generating more clues each turn, generating more energy each turn, able to keep making Thopters to get in the way of Ormondal. You know, Jerry's life total is nice and high, but he's going to have to start blocking those tireless trackers pretty soon.
Yeah, Ormondal not chunking through for as much damage as tireless trackers.
An ideal thing for Jerry would be if he can set up a turn where only one Thopter is able to be made and surprise it with like a Fatal Push or something like that. But who knows if he even has Fatal Push in his deck post-sideboard. I would guess that he might not.
So big draw step here for Jerry Thompson. Tobias not done yet. Another tireless tracker. Every land generating 3 clues now. Every clue generating 3+1/+1 counters, 1 on each tireless tracker. 33 life for Jerry Thompson here. And Chandra's ticking up as well. Worth noting, it's not for nothing. A little bit more energy, Tobias searching through his deck for another land. He's not out of gas yet. Apparently we're hearing all of the Ulamogs have been taken away already by Jerry Thompson here. So that's the reason that we're seeing plan B, I suppose, from Mark Tobias, but it seems like a pretty good one if we're honest.
Yeah, it looks like he's at the stage where he can kind of just sustain this indefinitely, just keep cracking clues, making more energy, drawing more cards, finding more cards that produce energy. Now he's got Aetherworks Marvel, so each clue is also with an energy. So I'm actually now struggling to see a way for Jerry Thompson to get out of this unless he's got some, sweet sideboard tech that I didn't anticipate here. But I actually think in the next couple turns, Mark Tobias is going to be closing in on victory.
Yeah, I mean, also, Chandra Torch of Defiance, close to using her ultimate.
Very true. And with Mark drawing all those cards, he's going to be able to start machine gunning Chandra emblem triggers pretty soon, too, as well.
Mark having to decide how much he actually wants to pump all these trackers for. With so much going on, each of these players being very careful to actually add up everything appropriately, make sure that things are working properly. The life total of Jerry Thompson taking a big hit there, both on single digits. And that, the scoop from Jerry Thompson, when we showed up, it looked like he had it, but as it turns out, Mark Tobias, his backup plan, a good one, and we're now going to get a chance to jump back to our main match and see how things conclude between Eric Froehlich and Chris Fennell, the two leaders at present in this tournament. They'd already played once in Limited, now we see them playing in Constructed, and it's coming down to the rubber game. Concealed Courtyard coming from Chris Fennell, who does have a lot of one-drops in his deck, but has not been able to find one on this occasion. Just basics from Froehlich. These guys playing it fairly slow, but plenty of options for Froehlich in terms of interacting with whatever it is that Fennell has going on as and when he needs to, albeit also with the Ula Mulligan of Ulamog in the starting hand.
Interesting that Eric has a couple copies of Negate in his hand here. These must have come out of the sideboard I suppose they do make sense in that they're able to counter a piece of disruption, like a Transgress the Mind, or protect an existing Ulamog or Marvel from something like Anguished Unmaking. Eric also saw Gideon's come out of the sideboard for Chris Fennell, and Negate can counter that. And then there's also Liliana's Mastery as well. So even though you would think of the Zombies deck as a very, very creature-heavy deck, it looks like there are still some key uses for Negate countering non-creature spells against him.
Just a Scrap Heap Scrounger in play thus far for Chris Fennell. And Magma Spray, the perfect answer to it. And one of the most impactful cards in Standard. I mean, was it with cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger in mind that R&D chose to put Magma Spray into Amonkhet?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Even before Kaladesh was out in the real world, we'd mostly settled on the Amonkhet set and had Magma Spray in there, almost specifically for Scrap Heap Scrounger.
I mean, of course, it does play very nicely in Limited as well when there's all of the Embalm going on, but there are some cards that are kind of public enemy #1 when it comes to how they interact with the graveyard.
Yeah, that was very true. A card that works, makes sense in both Limited and Context, and also was a healthy addition to Constructed as well.
Dread Wanderer coming down for Chris Fennell, so he does continually have the cheap creatures that can come back, and with Lord of the Accursed, actually that Dread Wanderer able to attack for 3 here. And finally get some damage in on Eric Froehlich. Looking at the lands that Chris Fennell has in play, we can see that the second colour for this Zombies deck is almost free. Concealed Courtyards, typically in the early game, coming to play untapped. And then you've got your ability with Shambling Vent to have an additional attacker at some point.
So Chris finally with his 4th untapped land now this turn, able to go for Gideon, ally of Zendikar. I think we will see him do that, and I think we'll actually see one of those negates come into effect here that we saw earlier in Eric Froehlich's hand.
Does play the land first, thinking perhaps about Censor.
But that is exactly true.
As it stands, though, this is kind of Censor plus in this instance. No need for cycling. We're just going to cast it and say that even with 1 mana up, we're not going to let a Gideon resolve. Harness Lightning there, also dealing with Lord of the Accursed, not generating any additional energy in this case, but taking care of the first of potentially many Lords that Chris Fennell could deploy in this match.
So it's looking to me like Eric's actually in pretty good shape. He's able to mostly stabilize the board still at 12 life here. He's got a negate here for the second copy of Gideon in Chris Fennell's hand. And then, if Eric is left a little breathing room, he can start getting Tireless Tracker going or fire off a Glimmer of Genius. And then from there, he can start to really get his engine humming.
One thing that I like about both these decks, as we see another copy of Gideon negated, is the fact that they both have a relatively large range of how far they can adjust their strategy based on the matchup. Here we can see Eric Froehlich is going quite a bit more controlling. I mean, with these Gideons, in a way, Chris Fennell has the option of being a bit more beatdown oriented. Obviously, they're pretty good in control matchups too, but there is a lot of flexibility there for each of these decks to say, what is my opponent doing? How can I best fight it?
Indeed, that is true, Tim. And we see Eric actually firing off Glimmer of Genius on his own main phase, getting frustrated with missing land drops too many turns in a row. Looks like he misses yet again, even after scrying 2 with Glimmer of Genius. So Eric a little bit stuck on mana here. Chris Fennell on the other side of the battlefield, actually a little not flooded on mana, but already up to 6 lands. But here's a 3rd copy of Gideon. Just a fresh draw for Chris Fennell that turn. No negate nor mana available to counter from Eric Froehlich here, so Gideon does stick, and that's going to put a lot more pressure on Eric here. I believe the advantage now is squarely shifted in favor of Chris Fennell, largely from that Gideon top deck that turn.
Yeah, being Gideon flooded a little bit more favorable than just simply being mana flooded, and with shields down from Froehlich having tapped out for the Glimmer of Genius early, it did mean that he was able to resolve the important Planeswalker. And looking at the cards in hand for Eric Froehlich here, while he's got a lot of good things going on, he's not going to be able to immediately answer that Gideon.
Yeah, I actually see, it looks like Eric is just going to have to play Tireless Tracker and try to get in front of the Gideon this turn, otherwise he's facing down a lethal attack, and I believe I saw an Anguished Unmaking in Chris Fennell's hand, so this actually could be the final turn sequence of the game here. The only other option available to Eric here is to go ahead and cycle that Censor and hope to find, like a Whirler Virtuoso or something like that that's a little bit more resilient, so he can at least survive through a removal spell. But It does look rough for Eric here in this position.
And Froehlich knows it. He's carefully looking at a lot of cards in hand and trying to find a way of making this work. Passes things back here.
So I actually like this pass back from Eric. You know, I think he concluded that playing the Tireless Tracker and chumping is not a winning play. That if he leaves his mana up, he may scare Chris Fennell into not attacking with Gideon, you know, for fear of, you know, some sort of removal spell or piece of interaction. And if Chris gives Eric one more turn, Eric can fire off Glimmer of Genius at the end of the turn, get up to 6 energy, play the Aetherworks Marvel that's already in his hand, and then maybe hit an Ulamog from there and remove the Gideon with the Ulamog. So actually, Eric's best play here is actually to leave himself dead on board and just hope Chris Fennell does not come in with the attack. But Chris smells blood and does go ahead and attack with Gideon. A cycle of a sensor here. Can Eric come up with anything at all? And it doesn't look like he can.
Yeah, finds a Harness Lightning, but with Lord the Accursed, meaning that there's a little bit of pump going on, I think the best that he can do, he may be able to stay at just 1 here. Have I done my math correctly?
Yeah, I think you have, Tim, actually. So that was Harness Lightning off of the cycling of Sensor there. Wow, taking out a key attacker, leaving Eric at, I think, yeah, just 1 life.
Unfortunate that had to use that on the Dread Wanderer. Post-combat with 1 card in hand, does get to come back for 3 mana.
Okay, 1 more turn for Eric here. What can he draw off the top?
It's a land and a handshake. Chris Fennell advances to 12-1. Now, obviously, none of these things are set in stone, but we believe that with that kind of a record and just a few rounds to go left in Constructed, that puts him in a position of virtual top 8. He just needs to perhaps get an intentional draw at some point in these latter stages of the competition.
And that is a revenge match, actually, for Chris Fennell in the sense that his only loss this tournament was to Eric Froehlich back during round 11 of Limited. That's right.
Yep, but conveniently for us, that is not the end of the magic for us in this round. We have more matches to go to, and we're going to get a chance to look in on our back table and get a chance to see William Huey Jensen. He is up against Dean McLaren, and we've got the Sultai Aetherworks Marvel deck that we saw in the hands of Reed Duke, and on the other side of things, it's Black-Green Delirium from Dean McLaren. Nissa in play here along with a Walking Ballista for Dean. This is their game 3, both these players on 8-3 and a draw, so at this point, if they pick up the extra loss, I think that that's kind of game over in terms of potentially making top 8, so everything to play for here. Fatal push on Walking Ballista in response to Nissa activation. Great bit of timing there. Yes, these plant tokens get a little bigger, but if you're putting counters on things, it's hard to think of many creatures better to do it with than the Walking Ballista.
So getting a look at the board state, looks like a pretty even board here that, you know, this could turn into anyone's game. It looks like both players low on cards in hand and roughly even on the board. You know, Dean McLaren having a slight edge here with having Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, on the battlefield.
Aetherworks Marvel coming down from Jensen. He's on 4 energy thus far, and he's actually got an Ulamog in hand. Not enough mana to think about casting that anytime soon, but should not be too difficult for him to engineer getting a couple of extra energy here, simply just because he's got creatures that at some point are going to be dying off, and every permanent that's going to the graveyard will generate a little bit more energy for him.
And Huey making a nice attack here, just swarming around Dean McLaren's board. Dean with only 3 blockers. Even though Dean's creatures are bigger, Huey valuing the fact that he gets to pick off that Nissa, who only had 1 loyalty there. And now, you know, Huey sitting in a pretty nice position with Aetherworks Marvel here. Looks like he's on 5 energy, so not enough to activate just yet, but if any of his permanents goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, that will give him the 6 energy he needs to activate.
So Swing is coming back from Dean here. He's doing the work that he can. Jensen on 16 thus far, but he's going to have to take a chunk in order to carry on the game here, and nothing more from Dean McLaren. Doesn't look like there's too much going on in McLaren's hand there, and both these players living off the top, but we said it once, I'll say it again, if you're living off the top and get to see an extra 6 cards, you're probably in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I do have the advantage going to Huey from this board state. You know, his life total is fairly decent. He's got the Aetherworks Marvel in play. Dean McLaren appears to be out of gas.
Jensen there, just double-checking his sideboard, making sure he's got a feel for what he could hit and or miss. Has a Servant of the Conduit, which will represent the additional energy that he needs here.
And frankly, Huey, not all that far off from actually just casting an Ulamog here. He's 7 lands in play, plus Servant and Conduit makes 8 mana sources. So, as long as he's not under too much pressure, almost anything he draws here is good. 9th and 10th mana source, let him cast Ulamog from hand. Anything that gives him energy is great. Any kind of permanence that can get in the way and even maybe just block and die and give him more energy from the Aetherworks Marvel. It seems like the longer this game goes, the more favored Huey is going to be. He does take a spin at the Marvel here. Let's see what he gets.
Now, I like activating this in the main phase because there is the possibility of Liliana Death's Majesty, and we see it coming straight out of those 6 there. Having activated it now, it means he can immediately use the powerful Planeswalker's abilities rather than where typically you might see an Aetherworks Marvel being activated at instant speed in your opponent's turn and have a slightly different outcome. Ishkanar coming down, bringing along with her a full 3 more spiders.
And now things swinging greatly in favor of William Huey Jensen here. That Liliana, an awesome hit off of Aetherworks Marvel. One of my favorite cards from Amonkhet, Tim. Beautiful, beautiful artwork on there, and a really cool addition to this Sultai deck in that it just gives the deck so much more play in the mid and late game.
Now, Ishkanar Graph Widow does have an additional ability that we don't see used very often, but it might prove relevant in this game. 7 mana, target opponent loses 1 life for each spider you control. With 7 spiders in play and access to enough mana to activate Ishkanar, this is a big, big problem for Dean McLaren. McLaren here. He's at least able to remove a few key permanents from Hugh Jensen's deck and get a feel for exactly what's going on. But you know what? I'm not sure that that's going to be enough. Dispossess, another sort of key tool that's printed in Amonkhet, but very relevant in this standard format because of cards that are not actually Amonkhet cards. I like the sort of variety of answers available in standard these days.
Yeah, Tim, our general strategy is we always want to make sure that shortly after we introduce powerful threats into a format that we're adding cards that can answer them. So that's why you see a lot of artifact hate in Amonkhet, like Manglehorn, like Dissenter's Deliverance, and like Dispossess that you mentioned there as well.
Rogue Refiner coming down, drawing another card for William Jensen. He's on 3 energy thus far. Not loads of time left on this clock, but I don't think that either of these players needs to be too worried about the game not ending. I'm sure that Dean McLaren at this point, if you offered him a draw, would take it. I do not believe that it's going to be too many turns before Jensen able to close this out.
Huey up to 6 energy now. Also activates Liliana, makes a zombie, puts a couple cards into the graveyard. And here comes Transgress the Mind, having a peek at what Dean McLaren's working with.
So that was a Tireless Tracker.
Tireless Tracker. I see. Oh, Tireless Tracker. I see.
And that enough for the handshake. Dean McLaren looks at the incredibly full board of William Jensen and says, I don't think I'm going to be able to manage anything from here. And that another win for the Puzzle Quest team member there. William Jensen playing the same list by the looks of things as your brother Reed Duke. And we have one more match in our feature match area. We've already seen one member of Team Mutiny in our feature match area, that being Jerry Thompson. He was having a little bit of trouble against Mark Tobayash. Here we have Joshua Cho. He is playing a very similar looking Zombies deck on the right of our screen, but his opponent is on regular Aetherworks Marvel. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Yuya Watanabe has quite the same sort of plan going on as we saw from Mark Tobayash.
Yeah, taking a look at Yuya's list, this looks similar to what we saw Eric Froehlich playing with just a few moments ago.
So about 10 minutes left on this game. I think there's been a slight time extension. And Ormondal Profane Prince already down there at the bottom of the screen. We saw that it, bizarrely, was not enough against Aetherworks Marvel in a previous iteration. Radiant Flames there from Yuya Watanabe getting dealt with.
And this is actually a pretty similar board state, Tim, to what we just saw in Jerry Thompson and Mark Tobias's matchup. Ormondal attacking into Whirler Virtuosos, which can sort of spend 3 energy to blank that attack each turn. Looks like Yuya going from 4 energy down to 1. to essentially fog that Ormondal for a turn there. And again, as long as Yuya can just keep generating energy each turn, with the help of clues from Tireless Tracker, drawing into more cards, and the Aetherworks Marvel triggering off of those, he's going to be able to keep that Ormondal in check indefinitely, and maybe even generate enough energy that he can afford to spend some on Aetherworks Marvel as well.
Watanabe, he's going to have to deal with Ormondal very quickly here. Casting the Harness Lightning mainly just for energy, because flying blockers with Duelo Virtuoso far more important to him right now than killing off what is a pretty gigantic creature.
That was actually funny. Yeah, he just cast Harness Lightning on the Diagraph Colossus and just opted to spend 0 energy, so that he just 1R instant gain 3 energy out of that Harness Lightning.
Glimmer of Genius means that he's now above 7 energy in terms of Aetherworks Marvel, but I think there's still a temptation to just make more Thopters in this case. I guess that if you do hit Ulamog, you can just deal with Ormondal very, very cleanly.
Yeah, my gut is that Yuya is going to take the more conservative route here and make sure he first has enough energy to cover the Ormondal each turn, and then once he has 6 additional beyond that, he'll start to activate his Aetherworks Marvel.
Plenty of mana available to Yuya Watanabe here.
Now, the other angle going on is Yuya's down to 5 life, so if Joshua had some way to attack his life total directly, that would be an option here, but I don't think the mono-black version of the Zombies deck really has that many effective ways to just attack the opponent's life total directly in the same way that like a Wayward Servant would be able to in a black-white version.
Yeah, not too much sort of explosive damage. It's fairly easy to kind of prepare yourself for how much damage you might take from this deck. Lord of the Accursed there coming down. It does mean there's an additional zombie thanks to the Diagraph Colossus that's in play, and of course all of those zombies are pumped, but really there's one attacker for Josh Cho right now, and it is Ormondal. Josh Cho on 39 life, so it's going to take a while for him to be killed off by traditional means, but as we know, these Aetherworks Marvel decks don't necessarily need to resort to the traditional. Sometimes they can just eat their opponent's libraries.
Shielded Aether Thief coming down there for Yuya Watanabe, an extra blocker in case Josh Cho's plan is to go wide with a whole bunch of zombies and swarm around Yuya's defenses. And we also see, Yuya actually has enough mana to cast Ulamog there. There's a Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. This is his 9th land, so that gives him his 9th and 10th mana. Ulamog comes out. It's going to take out Ormondal and Lord of the Accursed. And now Yuya looking to be in great, great shape.
Yeah, this is the reason that we have the advantage bar, is because sometimes life totals do not tell the whole story. And in this case, even though Yuya Watanabe is on 5 life, he's just dealt with what was really the kind of the one key threat that had Joshua Cho in this game. And now that that's out the way, he's the one that can make magic happen. So, in case you're wondering where Ulamog is, Gonti, Lord of Luxury, had already stolen a Censor, and because Yuya Watanabe had no additional mana available, Cho was able to counter the big threat. However, in spite of that, it did take out basically the most important pieces, certainly, of the offense of Josh Cho. So I think that the advantage bar is accurate, even though there's not an Eldrazi Titan in play. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, an interesting one that Death Touch relevant in many places, and stealing cards from an opponent's deck when they're that all in on a singular plan, potentially very powerful indeed. Worth noting, of course, not a zombie. If anything, I suppose the Aetherborn are like the exact opposite of zombies. They're just alive for a very brief moment as opposed to dead for a lot of time.
That is true. It's a funny way of putting it.
Up to 8 energy there now for Yuya Watanabe. Glimmer of Genius meaning that he also gets to improve his draws just a little bit. At some point, Aetherworks Marvel will be able to potentially find him even more threats.
Tim, it's been really impressive seeing the interaction between Tireless Tracker, Clues, Aetherworks Marvel, and Whirler Virtuoso. Just kind of sets up this whole engine that's very difficult to attack through, provides card advantage each turn, eventually fills up enough energy to activate the Marvel. And this kind of grindy game that these teamer decks is capable of, or are capable of, I should say, is really gives them a lot of staying power against a variety of different strategies.
Now, if we look at the clock, we see that there's actually not very much time left on this game, and I think at this point for Yu Watanabe, that time is... I mean, I guess for Josh Cho, especially, that time is particularly relevant. Currently, you're up a game. What we thought was an extension, actually, it had been kind of complicated. They'd had a deck check, but then they had just been on a separate clock. We have all of that time correct, so we are very shortly going to be at turn 0. And even though Josh Cho has 8 damage left to deal, I think that he might struggle to do that.
Yeah, I'm actually starting to think, is Yuya going to be able to close out this game? You know, if he finds an Ulamog quickly enough, you know, he can actually just chip away at Josh Cho's library and win that way. But Josh does have quite a few blockers, too. So this is time being called. Looks like Josh's turn is 0, so Yuya is going to have 3 more turns.
As things stand, though, it looks like it's 1-0 currently in terms of the match score.
Ah, yes.
Which means that for Yuya Watanabe, he has a slightly different set of things that he would need to achieve here. If he wins this game, obviously that's lovely, and he'll be very happy to do so. If he doesn't win this game, if it goes to time without the game concluding, he would win the match 1-0. So really, the pressure is very much on Josh Cho here to find a way of getting the additional points that he needs. He's got a lot of zombies in play, 8 damage to deal, not that much time to do it.
So I believe this is a Marvel activation, finding Harness Lightning, just takes out a zombie token. Not really any targets that are much better than that. Thinking this through, Tim, as far as how Josh Cho is actually going to be able to win this game, I mean, I can think Lord of the Accursed, if it can stick, can give his army of zombies menace and maybe swarm around Yuya's blockers, try to chip in some damage that way. But, you know, Yuya's got this Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, so he's going to be gaining even more life. Looks like he's tapping a lot of mana here, so something big is probably happening. What is it? It is another Ulamog. Boom.
Previously, I was trying to piece together a plan in which Relentless Dead died and got back a Crypt Breaker, and lots of cards got drawn, and they were all the perfect cards, and they all got cast. All of that planning for nothing. I think that now Yuya Watanabe if he was in good shape before now, he's in red bar advantage time, fantastic shape.
Yeah, to make it clear, I mean, Yuya has this game all but wrapped up here. It's sort of just me and Tim kind of theory crafting. Is there a way that, you know, a sequence of draws that Josh Cho could string together? You know, what if Yuya has nothing? Those are the kinds of questions we're looking at right now, but it looks super, super grim from Josh Cho's side of the battlefield here, and I think what we're most likely to see is that this game ends as a draw, and so the match goes to Yuya since he's up 1-0.
A tough round for Team Mutiny against these Aetherworks Marvel decks. Feels to me like they do have good sideboard options. I mean, it's just somehow or other, it's not quite come together. Even with Ormondal, in many cases, coming down and attacking in, just not quite able to close out these games.
Yeah, I mean, Black certainly has a lot of options. I really like Transgress the Mind as an option against these Teamer Marvel decks, but I do think, you know, from speaking to Chris Fennell, he said one of the major reasons he decided to add white to his deck was to have that additional interaction, and specifically for the Aetherworks Marvel matchup. So we may see actually that shift, you know, over time in the metagame, that these zombies decks are more and more splashing white to deal with Marvel and Ulamog.
Yeah, very, very intrigued to see how this standard metagame develops in the coming weeks and months, because I think that we've got a good sense of sort of where our baseline sits, but we know that after every Pro Tour, the hive mind gets busy on figuring out if there are ways of adjusting, optimizing based on what we've seen in these big events. Turn 2 of 5 now. Yuya Watanabe on 11 life. Those Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots making it all the harder for Josh Cho to even imagine winning based on beatdown. This turn 3 of 5, meaning that after this, 2 more turns, 1 each for each of these players. Rogue Refiner drawing a card, generating more energy. Another Harness Lightning. Going to be very, very tough for Joshua Cho at this point.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what Yuya does this turn, Josh Cho has 1 more turn to win the game. That's turn 4 of 5, his last turn. Looks like Ulamog chomps in anyway. Have to imagine there's somewhere between 20 and 40 cards left in Josh Cho's deck, so I don't think the Exile trigger is going to be super relevant on the Ulamog here. But yeah, interesting to me that Yuya actually is even bothering attacking here, in the sense that, you know, it seems like all he has to do is just defend himself for 1 more turn of Josh's, and that that'll be enough to win the game. But Goes ahead and gets in there, chomps down 20 cards.
One of these days, Ulamog might actually take a break from eating, but it's not today. Thus far, ceaseless in his hungers.
He's still working on that infinite gyro from back in Rise of the Eldrazi.
It's just spinning round and round and round. Ceaseless hunger, tireless trackers. These guys just don't stop. Still more clues getting cracked here. Yuya's having fun with this. He's like, you know what? I'm on camera. I'm going to make the most of this time.
Might as well keep the engine running. Bear in mind, still 2 Woodweaver's puzzle knots there representing virtual 6 life. So even with the amount of power that Josh Cho has on the board right now, you know, Yuya barely even needs to block at all. He's still got 2 Thopters he can make with the energy there. 2 more Thopters if he does decide to crack the Woodweaver's puzzle knots. So just, you know, shields are definitely up from Yuya's perspective here.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of other situations where if you're looking for burst damage from this zombie deck, you might say, well, what if he draws into a Westphale Abbey and then he can immediately make Ormondal and sack in the air? But in this case, even that angle is covered. Cast a Crypt Breaker, able to draw additional cards with the zombies that he's got, but we know that those draws fairly thin. Finds a Westphale Abbey. So you can pay 5, tap and sacrifice 5 creatures to transform Westphale Abbey.
And Josh simply says go. So we're back to Yuya's turn here, about to be back to Yuya's turn. That'll be turn 5 of turns. And, you know, whether Yuya wins or simply, you know, just passes the turn back, this game will at very least be a draw, and the match will go to Yuya Watanabe.
Four Thopters being made at end of turn there. Looks like Yuya wants to do this the old-fashioned way.
I suppose there's some slight value to actually winning this game in terms of improving his tiebreakers. Player game win percentage being one of the tiebreakers of tiebreakers.
And there is the handshake from Josh Cho. Josh Cho, you know, just a great player to have around. Very happy to see him doing this well on the Pro Tour, but in that exact moment seemed a little outmatched by Musashi's Yuya Watanabe. Good stuff from him. Musashi, they put up great numbers at the last Pro Tour. Once again, this just is one of the teams setting the pace in the Team Pro Tour competition here in round 13 at Pro Tour Amonkhet. That is the last of our games happening here. We've seen a lot of different variations on how zombies play against Aetherworks Marvel this round, and I think it's really interesting to see that the small differences in deck building for the zombies list, whether or not there's white in there for a few more direct answers to the payoff cards of Aetherworks Marvel, making a big difference to the result of those matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the white edition was just brilliant, you know, assuming that was planned out, expecting a field of a lot of Marvel here, because that is indeed how things played out.
But this is the end of this round. We will, of course, have plenty more Magic for you soon enough. Just 3 rounds left to go before we get to our top 8. We do hope you'll stay with us here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. But for now, these messages.
Welcome back to the news desk. Maria Bartholdi here, and it's time to get some new perspectives on deck techs with Luis Scott Vargas and Rafael Hidalgo.